poor deck because Tom Ross has proven otherwise, but didn't really put Seth on this strategy this weekend.
Well, one thing we've seen out of Seth, whether it was in Modern, we saw him play top 8 the Pro Tour, playing Burn, and then playing Twin at the last Modern event, is Seth is very comfortable with decks that have a lot of perceived pressure, meaning that they have this aggressive game plan on the early turns, but they're not necessarily just curving you out with creatures. They're really making you play around the spells in their hand as opposed to the spells on the board. And Infect is really another deck that does that very well.
Teamer Delver does have some game against Infect, and Wilson is an incredibly skilled player. We talk about best players in the world. You talk about Reed Duke, you talk about Owen Turtenwald, Huey Jensen, Yu Watanabe. Jacob is young, but Jacob is very good. And we're going to see if he can get the win over a very experienced player here in Seth Manfield. A Glistener Elf is going to get things started. Wilson will deploy a Nimble Mongoose. That thing having Shroud pretty important at this point. And he will, I imagine, pass the turn back over to Seth in a minute here. Though Seth might be considering something like a Daze here on the Mongoose.
I would like to get in with that Glistener Elf if at all possible. It depends how comfortable it is Seth is with trading these two creatures.
Well, apparently he's not very comfortable because he's going to cast a Daze on the Mongoose. The Mongoose will be countered. And we have seen Infect win as early as turn 2. Seth can play a Tropical Island, cast an Invigorate, and then Berserk. And that can be lights out. Don't know if he has that combination of cards, or even if he does, if he wants to go for it, but it is something to be scared of.
Well, swing with the Glistener Elf. And so far, just by his time with the early turns, getting one poison, kind of choosing his moment to go for an attack.
See if Seth has any follow-up here. He will just pass the turn back over to Wilson. Wilson will take a draw. He does have Volcanic Island in hand, just picked up a copy of Polluted Delta.
Yeah, and strategically, these games are just very sharp. You see both players with the mana curves of their deck are among the lowest in Legacy, playing lots of one-drop creatures, and then cards like Force of Will, like Daze. You can even see Invigorate on Seth Manfield's side, so a lot of free spells flying on both sides. They really have to be careful about when they want to try to play around their opponent's cards.
Misty Reinforce into a Noble Hierarch. Hierarch pretty big here. It'll let Glistener Elf win the war against Delver of Secrets.
And well played by Seth here. He's continuing just to leave mana up, and the trick is to just put enough pressure on the board to make himself ahead and no more.
It's always interesting, this little game of one-mana spells, because the interaction is so fast and furious, even though everything's so cheap. Players have free spells. You know, Wilson has access to a card like Lightning Bolt. You saw him check with Delver, not like what he saw. So he's going to sacrifice his fetch land before his draw step. Seth saying, can I sacrifice 2? Asking, not just doing it, because he could be playing in Stifle here. So Jacob does give him the green light, and taking a look at Jacob's deck list, he does have 4 copies of Stifle.
Yeah, Jacob has 4 copies of Stifle, and actually Seth has one of his own. So it's possible that Seth is going to attempt to stifle Jacob's fetch land right here.
Potentially, and Jacob is actually asking right now, am I able to search with the Polluted Delta? So Seth could have the one of Stifle right now, as he is reaching for his hand, and he does have his Stifle.
Just pressing those little bits of advantage that he has. Maybe Jacob does have Spell Pierce here. He can pierce the Stifle, but even then, Seth has won the Tempo War. They're just trading cards back and forth, and he'll have gotten Jacob's turn.
This would be interesting, too, if you see a Spell Pierce, because if a Spell Pierce takes place on the Stifle, and it's not going to, that's a Spell Pierce that's not taking place on maybe one of the pump spells.
Yeah, and look at the discipline on Jacob's side. He has some extra lands. He actually has 2 copies of Spell Pierce in his hand, and despite that, lets Seth Stone Rain him with the Stifle.
And it was very clear for Wilson's turn. He did not want to draw the card that was on top of his deck after he checked with Delver. Makes sense. It was a land, not very useful. Now the follow-up is going to be Dismember. Dismember is going to go after Glistener Elf. Wilson will have to lose 4 life, but he doesn't really seem to mind given the matchup.
Yeah, it's one of the interesting things if you look at the Scars and Mirrodin's block strategies. There were all these cards with Phyrexian mana that you have to pay a lot of life to cast, but are almost all free rolls against Infect strategies.
Also won 2 copies of Dismember in his deck. You saw him just cast 1. Sometimes you'll see Forked Bolt there, maybe Chain Lightning depending on the build. But Jacob going with 2 Dismembers. Seth does deploy an Inkmoth Nexus, has Noble Hierarch at the ready. Maybe considering using that this turn.
And we talked about this earlier when Jacob was on. His build is very much predicated on just playing low to the ground mana denial spells. He has no copies of Jitax and Probe, instead going for a full 4 Spell Pierce, 4 Stifle, 2 Dismember.
And of course, the creature is pretty straightforward. Delver, Secret Symbol, Mongoose, and Tarmogoyf, all 4 ofs. classic Teamer Delver we've seen for almost a decade now in Legacy. Manfield figuring out how he wants to tap his mana for something. Feels like a Blighted Agent, and it is. So the 1/1 unblockable with Infect is now on the battlefield. Wilson will check with his Delver of Secrets. It will flip. It's a copy of Force of Will. He'll quickly deploy Misty Rainforest and get in for 3 points of damage. It's 15-14 in favor of Wilson. And we'll head back Seth's way.
So now the race is fairly interesting because both players are hitting at approximately the same speed. You see Jacob hitting for 3 a turn. It's a 5-turn clock that he can likely shave a turn off of with the lightning bolt, whereas on Seth's side, he's hitting for 2 poison a turn, which is, you know, on his side, also a 4-turn clock, which he can probably speed up.
Interesting to see Seth is going to fire up Inkmoth Nexus here. Is it appropriate to attack with 1 creature due to Exalted, or is it better to attack with 2? Seth has opted to go with 2 and kind of split up the damage in case a removal spell does come out from Wilson. But it looks like at this point, Seth doesn't really have much of any pump spell action going on as Jacob will move to his turn.
Yeah, activating 2 creatures to better play around removal. It does also show Jacob, though, that Seth doesn't have uses for the additional mana that he could save by not firing off Inkmoth Nexus.
3 more damage will come across. Manfield will go down to 11.
Yeah, and on Jacob's side, I believe he's just sitting on a pair of Force of Wills with blue cards to accompany.
Which might be more than enough.
Well, on the table, the race is close. It does favor Seth, however.
Brainstorm here from Seth. And what's interesting is this might be good enough to force. Maybe. Brainstorm is the best card in Legacy.
I mean, the thing is last turn, the way Seth played it suggested that Seth's hand was rather weak. He didn't have anything else to do with his mana except for activate Inkmoth Nexus. And this Brainstorm, if Seth's hand is bad, is very similar to a draw 3. And I think Jacob is going to jump on that fact and go ahead and Force of Will it.
So Force of Will, he'll lose 1 again. His life total doesn't matter at this point. It's the Infect that really does matter. Wilson going to go down to 14, but that Brainstorm has been countered. And I agree with you, just with how Seth played the previous turn, it does feel like his hand is a little bit weak at this point. There's no real evidence of that. Seth concealing his hand from everyone right now except himself. But just given the play pattern and the information that you can infer, it does feel like his hand was a little bit weak, still is now that the Brainstorm has been countered.
So they're now reevaluating the turn here. Is he going to activate Inkmoth or just send the Blighted Agent?
What's interesting, too, is that if Seth feels like this is a racing situation that he can't win, he can actually hang Inkmoth back on defense to move the Insect Operation from a 3-2 to a 2-1. And that'll give him some more time if that's what he's looking for. But he's going to fire up, and he's going to come into the red zone. So here we go again.
Well, the scary part for Seth is that if Jacob has him covered, maybe he has a kill spell for one of the creatures or has a lightning bolt to decrease Seth's clock by 1, Seth isn't going to learn this until it's too late.
3 more damage. We shall see. All Seth can do is shrug his shoulders and say, yeah. So he's down to 8. Wilson with a Volcanic Island, just a passing of the turn, drew a land last turn.
It's getting real close. 2 attacks from Seth should make it lethal. Takes 3 from Jacob. So Jacob down 2 turns here.
Seth again considering firing up the Nexus. Looks like he's going to play Gataxian Probe. Wants to see exactly what Wilson's working with. You can see it's not a ton. Force of Will, Spell Pierce, and a Misty Rainforest. So Seth knows that he needs to beat a counterspell right now.
And this to me suggests that Seth has a pump spell. So by paying 2 life for Probe, he actually has put himself in lethal range. Or no, he's paying blue mana for
Yeah, for once. Okay. For once. It's rare.
He doesn't want to put himself in range of an Insectile Liberation and Lightning Bolt hit. So now he's activating, presumably, the Inkmoth.
Potentially. Could also have some sort of manipulation, but he's actually going to go with a crop rotation. Okay.
Well, this makes it possible. If this is for if this resolves, Jacob has to fight a counter war over this. If this resolves, he gets Pendelhaven and it's lethal.
Yep. Wilson knows that. Force of Will, removing Spell Pierce.
And this is a great move by Seth. He gets Jacob to lose all his cards to crop rotation. That's certainly not the spell Jacob wanted to fight over.
There's a Berserk. Berserk will work just fine. That's a 2-power creature. You double it up, makes it 4, and that'll get the job done here. Seth Manfield is going to win game number 1 here over Jacob Wilson. In fact, up a game here over Teamer Delver, as these two players that both made the top 8 of Pro Tour Fate Reforged will continue to battle it out. We'll take a look at the sideboards here, and we will start with Jacob Wilson. He has 2 copies of Pyroblast. He's got a Blue Elemental Blast, a Light from the Loam, and a Flusterstorm, 2 Spell Snares, an Ancient Grudge, 2 Grafdigger's Cage, 2 Rough Tumble, a Sulfur Elemental, and 2 copies of Submerge. I like a lot of what is going on here for Jacob. What do you like as options?
Well, he's just going to want to get things lower. Submerge seems like a great place to start. Seth is trying to pump creatures, and Seth also is playing forests. So it seems like a great position to be using a card like Submerge. Also, you just want to get lower to the ground and win these fights over different cards. A Pyroblast is pretty good. It takes care of a lot of Seth's counter spells. It can kill Blighted Agent. It's pretty decent here. Even to that degree, there are some other things he can use. Flusterstorm is not a terrible card to be using here. Rough Tumble, actually, also has a lot of application.
Yeah, a lot of options here for Jacob. What do we see on Seth's side?
Well, on Seth's side, we see the sideboard is a Karakas, a Wasteland, a Bazooka Bog, 2 Submerges of his own, which I assume will also be pretty good. Spell Pierce, Piracy Charm, Nature's Claim, Croson Grip, Force of Will, Flusterstorm, Sylvan Library, Spell Skite, and Blue Elemental Blast. So, yeah, I would expect Spell Pierce, Submerge to both be used here. Outside of that, he may want to go the direction of something like Sylvan Library or Spellskite if he anticipates becoming a more control role in this matchup, but he may also just stick with his main strategy for the most part.
Fair enough. We'll see how both players do opt to sideboard here. A lot of options available to both of them, and what is a very interactive but short matchup. I don't expect the games to take very long. In our backup match is Chris Anderson versus Brian Braunduin. Chris, of course, playing Thopter, Foundry, Sword of the Meat, kind of control there with Dig Through Times, and then Brian playing Miracles. So I imagine we'll have time to jump that way at some point. But these players will finish sideboarding up, and while we wait, we will talk about Cardboard Crack. 4 books available at Star City Games.
Yeah, so Cardboard Crack, this is the webcomic series that has come out. You can find them on StarCityGames.com. We previously had the first 3 editions available, but now we also have the 4th one available. You can get all of them for $12.99 each. They're available at StarCityGames.com/cardboardcrack.
A follow on Twitter, as I tell you every broadcast, and you should be doing the same. You can also find it in the Star City Games newsletter as well. Cardboard Crack, available, all 4 paperback books at StarCityGames.com today. As we get ready for more Jacob Wilson, more Seth Manfield, 2 great players, and this might just be a match playing for top 8. Whoever wins this one might be able to just draw in.
Yeah, well, I know looking at the standings, I believe Jacob Wilson will need another win if he wins it. He is the lowest tiebreakers of all of our 11 threes, okay. So it's unlikely that he'll be able to draw in. For Seth, however, this could bring him into top 8. We'll have to see how things shake up. And it's really a great matchup. You talked before about how both of them have a Pro Tour top 8, and you really can kind of see that in the last game. Seth does a great job of sequencing on that final turn to basically make that lethal attack, gets Jacob to burn, waits until using your Taxing Probe to find out Jacob's hand, then gets him to burn a counterspell on crop rotation so that Berserk lethals him. On Jacob's side, he had a pretty subpar draw, just had a Delver of Secrets with some Force of Wills. And Spell Pierces, not really what you want in this matchup. And you see he was able to leverage so much pressure without really having anything.
We didn't see something like Brainstorm or Ponder from Jacob.
No Brainstorms, no Lightning Bolts, no Ponders. He was just drawing cards off the top, and there was just Force of Wills and lands.
Yeah. Very strange draw there for him. We can't forget Wilson, 2-time Pro Tour top 8 competitor, lost in the finals at Pro Tour Born of the Gods to Sean McLaren. So Jacob is no slouch. Has won a lot over what has been a very short career, too, since he's so young.
Well, what I really like with Jacob's style is his range here that he shows off when he plays Legacy. So you look at some of his other big finishes. 2nd place finish with Abzan Pod in Pro Tour Born of the Gods. 1 Grand Prix Chicago in Modern with Jund with Lingering Souls. So kind of that same style deck. But then you go over to Legacy, and his standby is Teamer Delver, which is a whole nother kind of deck.
And yeah, and this is what he's been playing basically forever in Legacy. it hasn't really changed very much when he plays this deck. It's very straightforward. I mean, you take a look at his deck list. His deck list this weekend is all 4-ofs and 2 dismembers.
Yeah, I mean, well, you find a lot of times with these great players, these players that end up, with lots of Hall of Fame, with, these Pro Tour top 8 competitors, they really understand power in one sort of way. Your Wafo Tapas of the world who show up with the same kind of deck and just beat people up with it no matter the format. But for Jacob to be able to play something like Jund or Junk or Obzon Pod at a Pro Tour level and then come back with Teamer Delver, I mean, it shows a lot of his strength.
And hey, he's even celebrating a birthday recently, March 27th, so wouldn't be the worst way to turn 1 year older. He's got a Nimble Mongoose to start game number 2.
We saw last game Jacob wanting to trade the Nimble Mongoose with Glistener Elf, and that was enough that Seth was willing to daze the Mongoose off the board, so it couldn't happen.
Seth going to sacrifice a freaking Catacombs, though it seems like he's a little unsure of what he wants to get here. Reason for that, of course, is he's playing against a Wasteland deck, so a lot of matchups it's very easy to just say, I'll go get a Tropical Island, I will play my thing, and I will say go, but maybe he wants to go basic hunting here, in which case it's only a forest that's an option.
Yeah, he has 1 basic forest in his deck. If his turn 1 plays Noble Hierarch, it's not unreasonable that he goes and gets it. He has to be very careful, though, because he does play cards like Ponder, like Daze, so there's a lot of good reasons to get blue mana, but he also wants to be able to dodge Wastelands and Stifles out of Jacob.
He's going to go with the Tropical Island, so he's going to open himself up to Wasteland a little bit here. And the interesting thing there, too, is, Magic is a fun game. The mental aspect of it is fantastic, of course. Is he actually worried about his land getting killed? Is that why he was pausing to search? Maybe thinking, should I get a forest here instead? Or maybe he's hoping that Jacob wastelands this land because he's got plenty of lands in his hand.
I mean, Jacob has 2 wastelands.
He sure does.
At the ready, along with a lightning bolt. So Jacob certainly can be on the extreme mana denial plan if he wants to be.
Well, there's wasteland. That'll take care of the trop.
Waste all the duels, bolt all the mana creatures.
See if Seth has another land here. Haven't really seen much Wasteland action in Legacy in a couple of months. It's been a while since we've seen Wasteland games back and forth. It's the kind of game that Teamer Delver wants to play, though. There's a Wooded Foothills. Here's a Glistener Elf.
And Seth being very careful here. Casting Glistener Elf off of Noble Hierarch serves 2 functions. 1, it means he doesn't have to crack his Wooded Foothills and get stifled. And 2, he doesn't have to go get a dual land and possibly get wastelanded. He's protecting his mana very well here.
Glistener Elf is in. We head back Wilson's way.
Yeah, and Wilson will have to do something about it because thanks to that Noble Hierarch, the Glistener Elf will be able to attack through. So Jacob either needs to get something like a Tarmogoyf from play, or get a Lightning Bolt, or remove the Glistener Elf, or remove the Noble Hierarch.
And this is interesting here. This is a Ponder, which means Wilson's tapped out of blue mana. So Seth is safe to crack his fetch lands if he'd like to. However, if he does, again, the decision between Tropical Island and Forest is a real one. Additionally, if he does get a Tropical Island, does he have some sort of counter spell? Would he want to counter the Ponder? Is he maybe sensing a little bit of weakness here from Jacob?
Yeah, he could spell Pierce here. He could possibly Daze. By not playing another land beforehand, Jacob not representing counters of his own.
He's unsure. He is very, very unsure of what to go grab. All right, he says Trop.
Maybe the Tropical Island. As we know, Jacob does have another Wasteland to stand, so this land may not make it through the turn.
See if Seth does want to daze, maybe Pierce here. He just wants to make sure that he's okay around Stifle. And that's one of the interesting tensions that Teamer Delver does bring to the table, is if you play around Stifle, you might be playing into Wasteland and vice versa.
Right. If you look at Jacob's side, he actually is setting up for a more controlling route. Has another Wasteland in his hand, as well as a copy of Rough Tumble, so actually can take care of Seth's board. Now, ideally, he'd like to get that Nimble Mongoose up to Threshold before he goes for the Rough Tumble. You may see him spend some of his life points just to that effect.
And Ponder will be card number 2 in the graveyard. If he activates Wasteland to take care of the Tropical Island, that'll be card number 3. He'll be working his way up very quickly to Threshold for the Mongoose. Wilson going to keep with the Ponder. He'll take a Delver of Secrets. Now he's got to choose between either playing the Delver, potentially playing a Lightning Bolt, and he will play Lightning Bolt. It's not going after Glistener Elf. It's going after Noble Hierarch.
Well, if Jacob just wants to be trading resources, he can. If you go, there's two lines here. He can go after Seth's mana. He can go after Noble Hierarch here, eventually wasteland Seth off mana, and then try to get advantage that way. So then, if he does that, he can bolt Noble Hierarch here, and then he can trade or decline a trade between the two creatures. If he just wants to try to be more aggressive, I think the aggressive line is to take care of Glistener Elf. That lets Jacob start to attack.
Defensive Invigorate. That's how much Seth needs that Noble Hierarch.
Really interesting lines. They both are playing around so many different cards. You see Seth playing around the Stifle that isn't in Jacob's hand. Then you get a free spell at the end of it. Ones that are very difficult to play around.
We'll see what Seth's up to. It's another Noble Hierarch. Boy, this Rough Tumble's going to be disgusting.
If it resolves,
yeah.
This is a good. Seth is really setting up the board for a nice Rough Tumble. And you see Jacob chumping here with Nimble Mongoose. That's if you're Seth, I think you're concerned about that play. Because that play doesn't make sense if Jacob doesn't have a sweeper.
Jacob gonna draw. Here's Rough Tumble. It's the rough half. 2 damage to each creature without flying, and Jacob actually is well situated right now to play around Daze, obviously. He has a Spell Pierce in his hand, and Seth has some counterplay.
Yeah, now if he wanted to play around Daze, he could have wasted the Tropical Island and then gone for a Rough Tumble. Now, I think what he wants to do here is he wants to save the Wasteland for Inkmoth Nexus. Yep. So rather than playing on the counterspell, he decided to just simply play that using the Wasteland so that now he has Seth's remaining board covered.
Yep, and still with no infect, so he can afford to take a shot, presumably.
Well, hopefully. Seth has, I think, 2 cards. I mean, you could die. That is something Infect does, but it's unlikely.
So Rough Tumble does resolve. There go all the creatures. Manfield left with just a Tropical Island and an Inkmoth Nexus. Wilson with a beautiful setup over the past couple of turns to get ahead in this game.
Well, he certainly has kept the board clean with trades. The question is, who actually does better off this board, rebuilds better on this board state? Jacob's ahead by a land, but that's actually about it.
There's a Trop. Maybe it's Blighted Agent time? Yeah, Dig Through Time instead.
Seth going for Dig Through Time. This is a 1-of in his deck, and if this works, this is huge. You see Seth trying to be careful about what he exiles. Jacob does play Tarmogoyf. So
Spell Pierce is going to take care of that. I think that's smart. I don't think that you can let Dig Through Time resolving. The card's too powerful.
Yeah, and I think if you're Seth, you somewhat expected that to happen too. That Rough Tumble was so essential that I don't think Jacob, if he didn't have a Spell Pierce, he probably would not have been able to save the Wasteland there. He would have had to just waste Seth off blue just to ensure that the Rough Tumble had resolved.
Jacob's going to check with his Delver. Doesn't like what he sees, so he'll sacrifice his Polluted Delta, get a land out of his deck, so he'll have a Mystery Draw Step coming. Tropical Island is the weapon of choice here for Wilson. But you got to like the way that he has sequenced everything this game. Now he gets to take a draw step. In for 1 he will come. Manfield's going to go down to 16. And we'll see if there's a follow-up here. Well, that's not a bad follow-up. It's a Brainstorm in the second main phase.
Delver didn't flip that time, but certainly will be able to flip next turn.
Unless his Brainstorm is pretty bad. It looks like it wasn't great. Just a couple of lands over there.
Yeah, one of them is a Wasteland. I think he has another copy of Brainstorm and then 3 lands.
Yep. And one of them, thankfully for Jacob, is a fetch land. So Brainstorm done resolving. Misty going to come down. That'll also let him control his Delver too. So this isn't all bad. Seth will just have to pass. Jacob going to sacrifice the Misty before the Delver even gets to check because he knows the top cards of his deck are lands. He'll take one of them in Volcanic Island, put it directly onto the battlefield.
Yeah, going to go ahead and just crack here. And for Jacob, these early trades do seem to have paid off. He has kept Seth off threats. And one of the differences is that Jacob's deck does a better job of just playing some fair magic. When they get to this point, Jacob has few dead draws. His lightning bolts are still good. His spell pierces still have value. Whereas for Seth, he'll start to draw cards like Invigorate on this board, which really don't do anything if he's kept off creatures.
Daze not terribly attractive. It certainly is nice that it flips the Delver Secrets. I guess it's okay given the current board state of Seth just having 2 mana.
Yeah, there's a reasonable chance he can hit a spell, or if not a spell, make a decent tempo play. Just force Seth to tap out on a turn he doesn't want to tap out.
Yeah. And at the very worst, it's a card to put back with the Brainstorm that Wilson has in his hand. But another thing that I like about this turn is just Jacob just not in a rush to cast Brainstorm. No real reason to at this point. Not sure what he would even be looking for if he's casting Brainstorm.
Yeah, for Seth's side, he needs to get a threat on the board. Unlike Jacob, Seth doesn't really play kill spells. This 3/2 flyer isn't going anywhere. It's just a clock.
Seth gonna crop rotate. I suppose that could be a threat. Inkmoth Nexus, of course, is an option. Crop rotation gonna resolve. All right.
Well, it is a threat.
It is.
I think it's where Seth needs to start. A danger here is that without a lot of pump, Jacob can ignore this because Seth is winning the race. Or sorry, rather Jacob's winning the race. He has no poison on him. He has a 3-power flyer.
Wilson very quickly draws and he'll attack. Manfield's gonna go down to 10. Jacob with nothing to add to the board, so he just passes the turn back. Verdant Catacombs is the play. Okay. Inkmoth Nexus is feeling it. If you've watched Tom Ross play this deck, you know that
Here's an Invigorate from Inkmoth.
you can die pretty fast.
Is it going to resolve? If it does resolve, there's a huge temptation for Seth to continue pumping. Now, Jacob does play Dismembers, so it could just be a huge bait here.
See what Jacob's reaching for. He wants to daze.
I like that. Seth will just have to try to pay. See if that gets stifled. Does not look like it.
Looks like the Verdant Catacomb sacrifice is going to work.
At the very least, what this does is gives Jacob some insulation from getting berserked. I suppose he would wait until Seth goes for a berserk there, but...
I mean, maybe. Jacob's got a Brainstorm and a mystery card in his hand. Not quite sure what that mystery card is, of course, but this is scary. Seth's turn was so straightforward of just activate, no blocks, invigorate. What?
All right. I mean, that does change the terms of the race. To be sure.
Basic Forest is what Seth has searched up.
And he'll just pay. It's
Okay.
5 poison onto Jacob.
If it all resolves, we might have the response. Okay, another daze. It's a good response.
See Jacob here picking up lands for all his dazes. Not wanting to get dazed himself.
I like that. I also like that it's cards that he can put back with Brainstorm.
Jacob able to make some use out of these dazes. He is going to have to trade 2 of them for 1 Invigorate, but that may just be fine. Buy some lot of, well, life points, so to speak.
In a roundabout way. So that's got a couple cards over there.
Yeah, they haven't been lands. Remember, he can fight. He has free spells to fight with as well. He has dazes of his own as well as copies of Force of Will.
He's going to force the second daze. You talked about free cards. Well, there's both of them.
Yeah, 4 pitching days of his own. I believe Jacob just with lands and Brainstorm right now.
Jacob going to reorganize the stack, make sure it's very clear between the 2 players on exactly what's happening.
These are the floating blue mana in Jacob's pool. He floated blue before casting either of those daces. I think his Brainstorm just saw 3 more lands. I think it's Wastelands number 3 and 4.
There's a lightning bolt in between the two, I believe. Yep.
Well, that's going to be pretty good.
So there is lightning bolt now. Now there goes Ink Moth, and now Wilson able to win the war. And while Jacob did put 2 lands on top of his deck, he did find 2 Wastelands. He's going to very quickly attack. You have to imagine Wasteland that Tropical Island and get that weak stuff out of here. And now Seth is pretty stuck, I think.
Yeah, remember, he can't kill the flyer. He just has to race, but he has so few resources that he'll pack it up for game 3.
Jacob Wilson going to win game number 2 here against Seth Manfield. Team Delver and Infect are going to go to a 3rd and final game for what is essentially a win-and-in match, depending on tiebreakers, of course, but it certainly feels that way watching these 2 great players play.
Yeah, so going back to the sideboard, these are some great, this is some great games being played. We did see that Jacob Wilson's sideboarded Rough and Tumble just did a lot of carrying that game for him.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of posturing between the two, which makes it a lot of fun to watch, especially when you just have, again, a lot of 1-mana spells. So that means a lot of the interaction is going to take place early and often because everything is so cheap, and 1 misstep. That's all it takes when you're playing against either one of these decks. Infect can kill you right away, and Wilson's deck, Team Delver, can kill you in a roundabout way of all of a sudden I messed up, my spell got dazed, my land got stifled. That's what it takes for them to beat you. So it's very, very interesting. See, the match between Ross Merriam and Philip Braverman has finished up. If we can get a result on that, we will certainly let you guys know. Nick Miller keeping his eye on that match, and the other match, our backup camera match, is Brian Braun versus Chris Anderson.
I believe we have Ross Merriam getting it. Has result, leaving with result slip in hand.
He has a smile.
We'd be very happy if he...
he has a very, very big smile on his face. So if losing is that fun, I want to do that more often.
Ross actually, for the tournament here, he is 7-0 in Legacy right now.
It's really interesting that the change of deck for him to Sultai Delver, going from Elves that he's played almost for 2 years straight and has had a lot of success with the deck. No question, his results speak for themselves. But to make the switch for this tournament to Sultai Delver and to be 7-0 with that deck in Legacy, as he just handed the judge the match slip there, is very impressive.
Yeah, we've seen that switch from him and Jeff Hoagland, both players really branching out for this tournament. Both entered this round 6-0 in Legacy.
Oh, Jeff had enough.
It was the forbidden fruit for him, had never actually casted a Brainstorm.
Yeah, Jeff had finally had enough. If you follow him on social media, he is very anti-Brainstorm, not the biggest Legacy fan. And he's been playing a lot of Life in the Loam, Mox Diamond, Knight of the Reliquary decks that I can certainly appreciate in Legacy, decks that I like. Some Punishing Fire Engine built in there as well. But he's playing Reanimator this weekend, and he has simply had enough. Casting Brainstorm, putting large monsters into play ahead of schedule, and hey, that's how the format was meant to be played.
I mean, Brainstorm is really a powerful Magic card.
It's really good.
There are some very successful strategies that don't use it, but at the same time, if it was in their colors, they would.
I'm okay with Brainstorm being the best card in the format, personally. It's a really good card, but I'm okay with it being the best card, as we do have our result, from our backup match. Chris Anderson is back in Magic. He just beat Brian Braun. He is now X-3. That'll make him 12-3 going in the last round. Not sure if he's going to be able to draw. Again, tiebreakers are a thing. For Brian, this is another great start gone wrong.
Yeah, started out 7-0, got his first loss in round 8 to Ross Merriam, and at 4 losses, he has some great tiebreakers. One thing about this person, he might have a shot, but it may be another great day 1 that just didn't convert in day 2.
Yeah. And again, it's something that he has talked about, he's written about, he's gotten off to so many great starts at Invitationals, at Grand Prix, and he's top 8 at Grand Prix. Hey, he's won 2 of them. He won Grand Prix New Jersey, that 4,000 person event last year, beat Tom Ross in the finals, but he has had difficulty closing out tournaments to make the elimination rounds. And this one might haunt him again. But for Chris Anderson, a very nice welcoming back to Magic. We saw him top 8 the Open Series event in Columbus, really his first tournament back. He also won a PTQ for Brussels. So he'll be going there in 2 weeks for Pro Tour Dragons of Tarkir. And if tiebreakers line up the way he'd like, he doesn't have to play another match today.
Well, he can hope. We'll see how that all shakes down. A lot of those players at 12-3 will be able to draw in. Winner of this game hoping to be able to do it as well.
Yeah. Jacob Wilson, Seth Manfield. Seth will be on the play. Member of Team TCG player, again, made the top 8 of Pro Tour Fate Reforged, 3-time Grand Prix champion. Very, very skilled Magic player who somehow, given his results, flies under the radar quite a bit, but not a big talker. Lets his game speak for him, and it's a pretty good one. Same thing can be said for Jacob Wilson, too. I don't even know if these guys have exchanged words during this match outside of the things that they're playing. Not boisterous personalities here at the table.
No, I haven't played against both of them. They are quiet at the table.
Yes, they are. See if Seth can find 7 that he likes. Same thing can be said for Jacob.
Seth will be on the play for game 3. And he'll get start with Jadaxian Pro. See what he's up against.
We got an idea of what Jacob is working with. It's a pretty good hand here, too. Delver of Secrets, Tarmogoyf, Submerge, Brainstorm, Lightning Bolt, a Misty Rainforest, which has to decide if it wants red, or excuse me, if it wants red or green mana in Volcanic or Tropical Island, and then a Wasteland.
Good hand from Jacob. It is vulnerable to a Stifle if
Yes.
Seth has one. But once this hand gets rolling, it is a strong one.
I don't think he would ever mulligan this one.
Just about everything he wants. 2 threats, a Brainstorm, and a 1 and 0 mana spell. Be a lot of tools. It'll be difficult for Seth to play through that one.
Seth will draw his card from Gitaxian Probe. That's done resolving. See what his follow-up is here.
Seth has plenty of early action of his own.
There's this conundrum. Wooded Foothills. Do you get a tropical island in the face of a wasteland you've just seen? Or do you get a basic forest?
It'll be interesting.
Basic
Yeah,
forest.
he'll play around the wasteland that he knows about now. A lot of it depends on whether or not he would have another source of mana. You have to do kind of this damage assessment. How bad would it be if he lost his land to wasteland? At the same time, that land is Jacob's second land. Jacob does have Tarmogoyf, so using the wasteland does come at a cost for Jacob.
Is it Noble Hierarch? Is it Glistener Elf? It's Noble Hierarch. That'll provide the blue mana there for Manfield as we had Jacob sway. Pluto Delta is a great draw for Wilson.
Yeah, now he has 2 fetches worth of lands that he can use.
He'll start by sacrificing the newly drawn Delta.
Sacrificing the Delta, so Seth still maintains perfect information on Jacob's hand.
Mm-hmm. A Volcanic Island is the weapon of choice. Wilson down to 19.
Now, what we've seen, he has Brainstorm, Delver of Secrets, and Lightning Bolt available here. We'll see which one he decides to go for.
You know, Delver wants to get a clock on the table to start.
It's such a strong hand. Don't blame him here at all.
Manfield will draw a card. No infect creature on the table just yet.
Yeah, no threat yet, but that Noble Hierarch does a lot of work.
Here's Brainstorm. That resolves very quickly. 3 cards coming here for Seth, and 2 will be going back.
Brainstorm will help Seth improve his hand. Still pretty hard to say that he has a stronger hand, even after Brainstorm, as Jacob's hand really has no noticeable weakness in it. I guess where you could attack Jacob is that if Seth has a very fast double invigorate draw, Jacob's hand does not interact well with that.
Inkmoth Nexus, Glistener Elf. So a couple infect creatures on the table now. Spell Pierce is the reveal. Delver will flip. having a flying blocker may be important here for Wilson.
And Spell Pierce does insulate Jacob even further against a fast combo. Jacob has the Submerge and Lightning Bolt already as defense. So he has his flyer, and as we've seen before, Delver Dash does a good job of raising the Infect decks, provided the Infect decks don't get to resolve a Pump spell.
Tough decision here for Wilson. You don't see his turns take this long very often. Very sure of himself, has so much experience with the Temur Delver deck. Has won Opens with it. Seen him make the finals of Grand Prix Strasbourg with it. But Infect is a very complicated deck to play against, given that it can kill you basically out of nowhere. One mistake, one wrong land.
Yeah.
That's all that it takes. Wilson will use a Lightning Bolt targeting Noble Hierarch. Doesn't have to worry about days, no islands in play.
Yeah, but didn't care Noble Hierarch, it cuts Seth off blue mana. It also decreases Seth's clock. It's just about as good as killing the Infector.
Now, we have seen Seth use Invigorate defensively. I'm not sure if we'll see that again. It looks like he's giving it some thought, and so we will.
Yeah, just wants to save his Noble Hierarch. Cannot afford to be cut off of blue mana just now.
And with how powerful Invigorate is in this deck, that is a very loud statement. That will resolve, so Lightning Bolt is somewhat countered here. Misty Rainforest and just a passing of the turn. We're going back Seth's way.
So by not attacking here, Jacob's more or less offering the Insectile Aberration as a trade for either of Seth's Infectors.
Here's a Brainstorm now. That's going to resolve.
Now we'll have to see if Seth wants that trade. I think Jacob can afford to trade away the Insectile Aberration because he has a Tarmogoyf to eventually follow up.
Yeah, Jacob's hand right now, 5 cards. He's got that Tarmogoyf you mentioned, a Brainstorm, a Submerge, a Wasteland, and a Spell Pierce.
Brainstorm from Seth. Jacob not fighting over that with Spell Pierce. Seth does leave the 2 mana up to pay.
Seth has put his 2 cards back, so happy enough with his configuration. Taking a look at his notes, make sure he knows exactly what's in Seth's hand, which he should if he's taken good notes.
Does appear that Seth is going to offer the trade. Glistener Elf. Glistener Elf seems like a fine card to trade with the Aberration. I'm not sure he wants to trade Ink Moth with it. Ink Moth typically the harder card to answer. Then again, against cards like Wasteland and Submerge, Glistener Elf might actually be the stronger threat.
That is the question here. It looks like he's going to fire up Ink Moth X's and offer the trade this way.
Yeah, willing to trade away the land, but wants to keep his creature. He knows Jacob has a Wasteland in hand, and I think that influences his decision.
2 Infect damage will come across.
Yeah, and scores as a win for Seth. Jacob didn't swing the Delver last turn, and then didn't block with it either.
Maybe it's Submerge time. Maybe not.
It did serve to eat Seth's mana. If Jacob had swung the Insectile Aberration, Seth would have had to attack with Glistener Elf, or would have gotten to attack with Glistener Elf for the same amount of damage, and then had his mana up to make other plays.
Mr. Rainforest very quickly going to be sacrificed here by Jacob. Tropical Island will come into play. His draw was a Tarmogoyf. He'll deploy a Tarmogoyf. So he's got another one in hand. And now he's going to use Submerge on the Noble Hierarch. On top of the deck that goes. Wasteland there. This is a very productive turn.
And this is the turn that Jacob was setting up for, going very hard at Seth's resources.
And that Tarmogoyf is pretty big.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just a 3/4. Still your usual ones. No creature just yet.
Noble Hierarch's the draw, of course. Jacob left over with a Spell Pierce, a Brainstorm, and a Tarmogoyf. Here is the Hierarch. Passing the turn back. Jacob certainly pounced at the right time. Force of Will to draw, that's a big one. There's another Tarmogoyf.
And Jacob had Seth caught in a squeeze here with the Infect creatures. He had the Wasteland for the Inkamoth Nexus and has Tarmogoyfs for the Glistener Elf. And now Jacob is really pulling ahead with that second Tarmogoyf. This crash will be for 6. It'll put Seth down to 8. And barring some big pump spell finish from Seth, this game will go for Jacob.
The Force of Will is beautiful protection too. Such a great draw step. Making Wilson's hand Force of Will, Brainstorm, and Spell Pierce. Yeah.
Jacob pulling on a Force of Will blue card. That's going to be enough. So there you have it. Jacob Wilson winning the match. He moves to 7-0 in Legacy.
He's unbelievable with Teamer Delver. He rarely loses with the deck, and he is at it again. He takes care of Seth Manfield 2 games.